all his ambitions, all his crushed ideals for himself, I think he focused on his kid.
When he played wrong notes, or the phrasing was wrong, or the music was not what the father wanted to hear, Beethoven would get a slap, a shove, a punch.
Music he kept creating were a direct consequence of his battle against the physical odds.
Imagine being one of the greatest composers in human history and slowly losing the very sense that makes music possible. Ludwig van Beethoven was writing symphonies that shook Europe while going deaf, unable to hear applause, orchestras, or even his own piano. Yet in that silence, he created some of the most powerful, emotional, and enduring music ever written. This video explores the extraordinary life of Beethoven, his genius, his inner battles, and how he transformed personal suffering into timeless art. Watch until the end to understand how a man trapped in silence taught the world how to feel, and why Beethoven's legacy still speaks to us louder than ever, more than 2 centuries later. Ludwig van Beethoven was born in the late 1770s in Bonn, Germany. His family story mixed genuine musical heritage with instability. Beethoven's grandfather, also named Ludwig, had been a highly respected musician in Bonn, a figure of success and prestige that young Beethoven would cling to as proof that greatness could exist in his bloodline. As a boy, Beethoven's early schooling did not reveal an academic star. He struggled with spelling and arithmetic and often seemed average on paper. Yet music behaved differently in him. Words did not come easily. Sound did. At 10, he withdrew from school to study music more intensively. Soon, he was learning under Christian Gottlieb Neef, the court organist, an influential teacher who widened Beethoven's cultural and intellectual world. By 12, Beethoven published his first composition, a set of piano variations that quietly announced he was no longer merely a talented student. Not long after, with his family's finances weakening, he sought official musical work and was appointed assistant court organist while still a teenager. The 1780s was a time where music and ideas mattered, where the air carried the intellectual energy of German literature and the changing political spirit of Europe. Beethoven absorbed this atmosphere through patrons, teachers, and cultured households that treated him as more than an employee. One family in particular, the Brunings, gave him a second home, one far more stable than his own. There he encountered books, conversation, and a social world that quietly shaped the person behind the music. His ambition, however, could not remain in Bonn. The gravitational center of European music was Vienna, and Beethoven was pulled toward it like iron to a magnet. In 1787, he traveled there with hopes, traditionally hopes of studying with Mozart. Whether they truly met remains uncertain, but the legend has endured. Mozart supposedly recognized something dangerous and extraordinary in the young man's playing. Vienna welcomed him, not as a nobody, but as a phenomenon. He arrived with a special skill that made him immediately valuable: improvisation. In salons filled with aristocrats who treated music as a sophisticated social currency, Beethoven could sit at a piano and create storms. He played with a force that could make audiences feel something they did not expect to feel in polite rooms. He debuted major compositions, including early concert works and his first symphony, and although he later criticized some of those early pieces, they did what they needed to do. They introduced him as a serious composer, capable of expanding the classical forms he inherited. Around the turn of the 19th century, something began to happen that would seem almost impossible for a musician to survive. Beethoven started losing his hearing. At first, it was subtle, difficulty following conversations, missing words, withdrawing from social life because admitting the truth felt humiliating. Over time, it became undeniable, and the fear underneath it grew sharper. Music was his identity, his livelihood, and his inner world. What happens to a composer when the doorway to sound starts closing? In 1801, he wrote with visible pain about what he was living through. He confessed that he avoided gatherings because he could not bear telling people he was deaf. For anyone else, this might have ended a career. For Beethoven, it triggered a transformation. In 1802, while staying in Heiligenstadt, he wrote a document that reads like a private collapse and a private vow, the Heiligenstadt Testament. It was addressed to his brothers and never meant for public eyes. In it, Beethoven described the misunderstandings that others had of him. People thought he was bitter, stubborn, and antisocial by nature. He said they did not know the secret cause. He admitted that he had considered ending his life, and then he delivered the sentence that became the turning point of his story. He did not do it because of art. He could not leave the world, he wrote, before bringing forth everything he felt within him. From that point forward, Beethoven's music changes in scale and character. This is the heroic Beethoven, the composer who writes as if he is wrestling fate itself. He produces an eruption of masterpieces, symphonies that expand the form, sonatas that feel like psychological landscapes, and works that carry the sense of a protagonist struggling toward meaning. His Third Symphony, later called the Eroica, marks this shift with unmistakable force. Larger, more daring, and more confrontational than anything he had done before. Even his famous Fifth Symphony can be heard as a kind of argument with destiny. Those opening notes not merely a theme, but a knock, a demand, a problem that must be answered. During these years, he also writes pieces that reveal another side of him, the eerie beauty of the Moonlight Sonata, music that sounds like reflection and confession rather than conquest. As Beethoven's deafness progressed, his life narrowed socially and widened creatively. He increasingly lived as a recluse, more easily angered, more suspicious, frequently exhausted by conflict. His personal relationships were complicated. He never married, and his romantic life carried a sense of longing without resolution. The mysterious, immortal beloved letters, written with intense devotion, yet never sent, or never received, remain one of the most haunting artifacts of his private life. Proof that beneath the harsh exterior, he was capable of deep vulnerabilities. In 1824, he completed the Ninth Symphony. It is not merely his final symphony, it is a redefinition of what a symphony can be. He brings voices into the form on a scale that had never been attempted in this way, turning the finale into a choral statement of human unity and joy. At the premiere, Beethoven stood near the performers, apparently keeping time, unaware of the applause until someone turned him to face the audience. It is one of the most painful and triumphant images in the history of art. The composer of Ode to Joy, unable to hear the joy in the room. In 1827, Beethoven died in Vienna at the age of 56, after a long period of illness. His final months were marked by physical suffering, and accounts point to severe liver disease among the causes. When he died, Vienna responded not as if it had lost a respected musician, but as if it had lost a force of nature. Tens of thousands attended his funeral. Even those who had misunderstood him, recognized what had happened and that an era had ended. And then the larger truth became unavoidable. Beethoven was not simply a great composer, he was a turning point. Before him, instrumental music often lived in the shadow of vocal music and text. Opera, mass, oratorio. Beethoven helped elevate purely instrumental work to a philosophical art form, capable of conveying a worldview without words. Beethoven's legacy lives not only in concert halls, recordings, and famous motifs. It lives in the expectation that music can mean more than entertainment, that it can carry the weight of a life. In his final days, he is said to have borrowed a theatrical line, quote, "Applaud, friends, the comedy is over," end quote. For Beethoven, the comedy ended, but his music lives on for generations.